Hi guys, here we are. I have to leave my camera in this position so that you'll be able to see what I'm doing the entire time. Thank you for joining me. Yay, today is project day. This is going to be great. This is kind of weird lying on the table, but I just have to tell you the rules of the game. I won't have time to take your questions, unfortunately, but what we're going to do is we're just going to attempt to work for the next 45 minutes, and then I'll try and answer any pressing questions or anything, detail stuff, and that will be done later on over the weekend. So a lot of you had asked, how we're going to post. I need you to post sometime over the weekend. So I'll close the contest, if you want to call it that, to Sunday night. Okay, so you have the whole weekend to finish up your project or that sort of thing. You do not have to post a finished project. You just have to post something that you worked on that you were inspired to do during this workshop. Okay, so it's got to have some kind of technique or something that you learned or whatever. So without further ado, I am going to start this broadcast. I'll post it later on. I guess you can always rewatch on Facebook, but I'm also going to have it on the YouTube channel so that you can watch it at any time. Okay, everybody, so without further ado, I'm going to get started, and I'm going to, oh shoot, I forgot my microphone. 2 seconds. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to plug it in and started. Okay, I'm going to adjust the camera so that you can see what I'm doing, and maybe move it over a bit, move the panel right into place. I did order, yay, you'll all be so excited about this. I did order a proper tripod, so that will come sometime next week. For now, let us get started. So we have our panel. I have chosen to use something that is a bit larger because I was going to use that skinny block of wood, but the problem with that for this demonstration was that you might not be able to see it because I don't think I could get far enough or close enough for that to happen. So for those of you who are following around with your materials, the first thing we're going to do is lay down the background. So I've chosen to use book, like text from a book. And so what I'm doing is applying glue to glue. So what that means is both the paper and the surface that I'm applying it to, my panel, are going to receive the glue. So that way, when I push the two together, I can use something. So for those of you who have a kit, that's what this is for. It's to push out any glue. Or if you don't have a kit, use a piece of cardboard or mat board or even an old rewards card or debit card or something like that. You just want to push the glue out. That's going to help it lay and dry flat. So I'm going to continue applying glue to glue, and I'm going to tell you a little bit, maybe bore you a little bit about why glue to glue. If you remember this principle, then you'll never go wrong and you'll never have air bubbles. So what happens when we're gluing papers down to a surface is that both our surface and the paper itself, both are very absorbent, okay? So because both are very absorbent surfaces, they're competing for the moisture of the glue. So if you just put the glue on the paper, then it might absorb it by the time you go to glue it down. Same with the back. If you put the glue on the back first on the board and not on the paper, it might have already absorbed glue by the time we put the paper on. So anything that is thirstier than the other thing that will have hogged all the moisture will result in an air bubble. So if you're wondering why you get air bubbles, one of the reasons is that you didn't do glue to glue. The second reason is that you didn't push out the air when you laid it down. So you see when I laid it down like this, now it's imperative that I go back and I push it right to the edge and flatten it to the back surface. So at this point, I'm not being particularly careful to make sure I'm getting the whole thing covered, or, you know, if a bit tears or whatever. I don't really care because this is really just background. For me, like I mentioned before, I like text because when I scratch through, I like the idea that, you know, a word or two may pop out, and that to me is really fun. I'm just going to place that one down, push out any excess glue, and then in this little area here, there's no text. So maybe what I'll do, whoops, I have to glue the whole surface. Remember, glue to glue. Is I might just put down a bigger piece and then glue to glue. Okay, so that in a nutshell is how fast I want you to be able to do a background. So I have spent classes with people where they've spent 3 hours collaging their background, and the hazard in doing that is that it becomes altogether too precious. I'm going to save that piece because of that little hole. It's kind of fun. So it becomes altogether too precious, and then what happens is people are afraid then to do anything on top of it. So as you can tell, I'm going to turn this again so you can see it. This is not a precious background. This is just a background. So for the process, now that we are moving on, don't worry if you're lost or if you're like, slow down, slow down. Unfortunately, we haven't got a lot of time for slowing down, so we're just going to go ahead and I'm just making sure everything is good here with my, there we go, with my setup. You guys can still see? Yes, excellent. Okay, so remember, you can't ask me questions during the broadcast. You have to talk to your to the other participants, and maybe somebody can answer the question, but I'll try to get to the answers today, later on. So just put them in the comments and then I'll answer later. If it's something that you need to move forward, then try to rely on the help of other people. So I've decided to use this magazine image because I think it's going to be the easiest to demonstrate what I want to do. And that's just because right now, the reason we started this, or I started this whole broadcast, was just to get people being creative and to use what you have. So maybe we don't have the luxury right now of getting photocopies and the proper image and everything else. So I ripped this out of a magazine and then I painted the back white. If you had time to do this ahead of time and paint the back white, it helps, but only when you're going to be applying wax. So if you didn't do that, don't worry about that stage. But I have that image right there. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this out of my way for a second. And I'm going to place this here and I'm going to cut this out. So I have the option to use scissors or a knife. So when there's a lot of detail, I tend to go in with a knife. My only issue with doing that right now is I lost my glasses at the beginning of all this and I don't have any glasses. So I can't really get in there with a knife because my arms just are not long enough to see what I'm doing. So you do not have to cut out your image perfectly, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. I want you to cut it as close as possible because we do not want to have an outline. So I'm going to demonstrate that. You don't want to do this because then that's just going to create more work for you to get rid of. The only time that you would do that is if the contours were too difficult to cut out, meaning I'm going to use the example of a tree with branches. You can't really cut out around all the branches, so you kind of just have to do this. But for this project to learn, it'll be much easier if you actually choose an image that has contours that can easily be cut out. And also, complete images are easier than non-complete images. So what that means, if anybody remembers my moose, which I'll show you afterwards, but my moose didn't have legs, right? So I had to, I could do one of two things. I can make up legs, I can, paint them in or whatever, or I can position them such that the mind will complete the image for me, and so that's why I put the moose at the bottom of the board, the canvas, because it was or what I did was I created the like an illusion of belief. So you believe that the moose has long legs because that's what our image of a moose is, right? That he has long legs. So our brains are able to fill in those details for us. So you can see what I did. I cut out my chair, so I have it ready to go onto my panel, and I can play with position and that sort of thing. But I want to show you something very interesting, is that if I take a little piece of tape, which I don't have any handy, so I'm just going to pretend, but if I flip this over, you're going to see something really interesting, is that I have made myself a stencil of a chair. Okay, so I'm going to save this because when I'm doing, oh, there's a piece of tape right there. Give me 1 second. Okay, so when I'm doing my painting, I may decide that something, sometimes you just go, oh, it needs a little something. And maybe that might just be a shadow. Maybe that might be an outline. So by me fixing this this stencil, and then on the back, you can see I cut it out because there were pillows in the picture, and I just decided that I didn't want pillows. So I'll show you later how to paint those out. So there we go. So I'm just fixing the back of this a wee bit. And now I have an exact stencil of the chair that I'm using. Okay? So, and it doesn't matter which side I use it, it's just a chair. The reason I flipped it over was so that you guys could see the image because it's painted white. So I'm just going to put a piece of tape on this one, and I'm going to flip it over, and it's just because I had trimmed my paper earlier, and this side is just a little flimsy. And it's not going to make a difference if I don't use it, I'll just throw it out. But if I do end up using this stencil of a chair, I just want this side to be a little less fragile. So I'm just going to reinforce the edge by extending my stencil with tape. Okay, so now I have that. I'm going to save that as well. So you've noticed I've saved a bit of the background because we have background in here. I now have a stencil cut, and now I'm going to play with, and I'm going to position this so you guys can see it. So I'm now going to position this and try to figure out what I might want to do with this. So I think I'm going to do it vertically, but I want you guys to be able to see. So I'm going to paint it sideways, if that makes sense. Because this way there's lots of room, but I'm not sure that that's the composition that I want to create. So I think I'm going to put this chair higher, because higher to me right now just seems a little bit, well, you can't really see it, but it to me, it's just, I can see the end result a little bit better, and it seems like higher is better. And of course, I don't want to divide the painting in half. So I'm always looking at structure when I'm positioning my image. And I'm not going to put my image in yet. I'm going to put my image in later, but I just want to know where it's going to be. So I'll take a pencil. I grabbed a pen, unfortunately, but I'm just going to sort of mark where it's going to go. And it doesn't need to be exact. I just want to know for positioning, because now I'm going to start painting, where this is going to go. So there we are. So like I said, if this is the middle, I've dropped a good portion of the chair below it, because if I were to put it near the top, then that would actually cut the painting right in half, and if I put it at the bottom, it would do the same thing. So it's just the size of board I had, was a 612, and I didn't want, yeah, you guys can see, I didn't want to, because of the size of my image, to have to either reduce the chair size or whatever to keep it smaller or whatever. So that's why I'm just going to put it right about there. So now I've got my line on there, and now I'm going to start to paint a little bit. So one of my favorite techniques is to just have various colors in the same family. I'm going to move all this aside so that my palette is also visible. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to dispense some paints. Now I'm going to be using mostly acrylics for this because I don't intend to go into any wax on this piece, right? We're doing a faux encaustic on this piece, so I can use all acrylics. If you only have chalk paint, carry on with your chalk paint. I should mention the glue that I'm using is thinned out white glue, so that's all it is. If you go on Pinterest, you'll see a recipe for homemade Mod Podge, which is kind of funny because it's just white glue and water, and that's fine. Use what you have, but I would encourage you to use white glue with the water in it, or even what I've been talking about before is using wallpaper paste and then adding a bit of white glue. So whatever it is you can find, just go ahead and use that. I always dispense a lot of color at the beginning, and it's just every color I may be potentially using. And the reason I'm dispensing a lot at the beginning is because I very rarely will clean my brushes in between, because I like a wet on wet technique. So there we go. So I'm just choosing colors that are similar, are like colors, but then also I'm throwing in a little bit of colors that may be, like this one here is a crimson, but I'm only going to put a drop of it. So this is a golden acrylic, but again, it's just a drop. And then there's a little green gold, a drop, because I don't know what colors this is going to go into yet, but I do know that I'm probably going to use a lot of my neutrals, so that's why I dispensed more white. Bit of like a buttery yellow, that's what's that one called? Slipped my mind right now, but it's like a buttery yellow, and then there's like a tan sort of color, and then now I'm just doing drops of other colors, which may be important later, and they may not. I may just end up with them drying on the palette. We'll see what ends up happening. But I do tend to put in more color than I need at the beginning. And I'm going to caution you right here about using a lot of black early on. Black early on is great, but it tends to muddy your colors. So you can always deepen and strengthen your colors later. But right at the beginning, I would recommend that you don't deepen just too early. I prefer to keep things lighter, and then I can always go back in later and stain it a little darker. You know, my big vat of brown goo that I've got going over there. So I'm going to dispense some black, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to use it kind of cautiously. So I'm putting it away from my paint because I don't want to end up mixing the two things together. All right, so I think I have enough paint right now to get started. Yeah, I think I wanted a brown and I didn't really get a brown, so I may just have to mix it on the spot unless I see one that jumps out at me. My favorite brown is called Van Dyke brown, and it is made by Golden, but it's really hard to find. I'm not sure why. It's like I said, it's a golden color, and it's like between a brown and a black, and it's really a beautiful brown, but I don't think I have any anymore. I do, I use it up a lot, so I'll show you how to make sort of the ideal brown. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting the background of this, because it's not going to paint itself. So I always start with white. It's just for me, but you guys may have your go-to colors if white isn't something that appeals to you. So I'm going over top of everything, but it's not necessary. I could leave little bits and pieces of that background poking through, and either in a mist brushstroke or just in, on purpose. So, and I'm going around the chair, but I'm not being careful not to, cut in around. Now you'll also notice, I'm not sure if you can see that this closely, but I'm picking up a little of the two colors that I have right beside it. So the colors that I have right beside it is a yellow and that tan. And it's just allowing me to have like that dirty brush of mixing. And I'm just covering up the surface. I've decided not to let any show through because I know that once I try my wet on wet scratch back and stuff, I'm going to end up removing some of it anyway. So I'm not too concerned. And because I saved some of my background, I can always introduce it back into there. So now we have a wet on wet surface. So what that means is our paper in the background, whether you had a chance to do yours ahead of time or if you didn't, that's okay. It doesn't matter either way. But the idea is that the paint on top, before it's dry, I just do some direction lines. And I absolutely have no pattern in mind, no direction. I can do a lot, I can do a little, I can cross the entire board as many times as I want. You'll notice what's happening is that as I'm doing it, when I intersect, the paper is starting to lift in some spots. And because it's lifting, I can actually use that to my advantage. I can put the tool underneath and I can start to peel some of that back. Or you can just let it be and let it dry raised. I can also use the side of a tool to get, and I told you I would use different tools so I could show that. I had a shish kebab fork here to show you. Oh yeah, here. So I brought this in to show you that this is a great tool to use if you don't have anything else. So you get parallel lines if you want to just do some lines, some marks. And if your painting is looking really destroyed, you're thinking, no, what have I done? That's okay, because I use this, like I said, for direction and for texture. So I know Pam, who commented the other day that she really loves texture and she wants to create texture. And I was saying that I believe that texture comes from your layers. So already what I'm doing here is I'm creating texture because I'm raising the paper, but also because my paint is wet, I'm revealing a little bit of what's underneath. So I'm scratching and I'm creating texture. As that paint is drying, it's creating more of that. And I think that should be good for this point. So what you're probably noticing is you have a bit of a gooey mess going on, and that's good because as we're painting, we're going to be drying. Now, the bigger your surface goes, the longer it takes to dry, right? So in this case, because this is still wet, it's pretty small. It will dry pretty quickly, so you can use a hair dryer or a heat gun or something like that if you want to speed it up. I am not going to use those tools today because I want to I want to keep it real time for you, okay? So I've got this like this. I'm going to let this dry for a second, and in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my, so like I said, you guys can go ahead at this point and dry it up, okay? So if that's something that appeals to you, go ahead, dry up your image. I just had this idea that I might go ahead and trace this onto another piece of paper. So I don't know if I'm going to be using this yet, but I like repetition and shadows and marks and things like that. So and repeating elements, I guess. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out another one just for the sake of dry time. You guys could be drying up your whoops, my pen stopped working. that's why you want to use a pencil and not a pen. Okay, let me see if I can grab a pencil. I have a pencil nearby. Okay, so like I said, you guys could be using this time to just quickly dry up your painting. It doesn't need to be super dry. You just want to dry it up enough that when we take a piece of sandpaper across it, you're not smearing all your paint. So this is usually when I'm painting. This is a great time if I don't have other things to do to start another painting, because I generally have 2, 3, 4, whatever on the go at one time. So it's in this dry time or drying time that I take the time to do other things that may not be all that exciting. So I'll also, while I'm doing this, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something exciting I have going on for the weekend. So I'm not going to broadcast live over the weekend because I'm attempting different platforms for going live and doing split screen and that kind of thing. So I'm testing out platforms this weekend. So you may see something pop up here or there. It may not be very consistent at all. But just know I will take a few days, and then I'll be back on Tuesday, I believe, with the results of our little competition here, and I will have answered everybody's questions by then. I think I got rid of the front leg. I did actually get rid of the front leg by accident. So I'll just cut any little scrap of paper where the leg would have gone. Okay, or I could just trace it right back in. There we go. Somehow I lost that leg. But do know that today I'll be checking back and answering questions and things like that. A lot of you have asked for my PDF for ordering large, so I will get onto that today as well. There we go. Okay, so now I can put that leg back on that chair, and now you can see that my painting is almost dry, but now I have 2 elements, right? So that is that's kind of interesting. While I'm looking at this piece too, I'll show you where I cut out those pillows. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a brush, a smaller brush, I think, if I can find one. Wasn't planning on doing too much tedious work, but I'm going to take a smaller brush, and I'm going to take some of my background colors, but mostly white, and I'm just going to paint out this chair. So if this is something that doesn't appeal to you, then like I said, dry your piece or whatever you want to do. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to paint out some of this chair. So maybe I'll keep it real, maybe I'll make it a bit more there we go. I have to turn a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to pick up a darker color, because you can see that we've got some shadows here, so I'm using this a bit like a paint by number. And all I'm doing is I'm following the contours of the chair that already exist. Maybe I'm going to pick up a fun color, so all I'm doing is dipping my brush a little bit into one of the other colors. So instead of always darkening with black, I tend to darken with some colors sometimes, just for the initial lay down. And so this one is, like, I added a teeny hint of that pink. And so that chair is already a bit more interesting. So now I'm realizing, looking at it, that that back part needs to go down into here, because that's armrest, that's not the chair. There we go. Perfect. So that's funny. Perfect. It's not perfect at all. It is what it is. So now I'm going to paint a bit of this chair out. Picking up again some of my darker colors because I have to shade in there. That's a much brighter yellow than I anticipated because I picked that up, but that's okay. So again, following some of the contours, just very loosely painting out this chair. There we go. I think that was the leg of the other one. Picking up. Have you noticed, like, I haven't cleaned my brush once, so all I do is when I kind of run out of paint, I pick up the shade that I'm looking, and this helps me do kind of a on-the-spot shading. So, and because I didn't like that that color, I'm going to go over it with another color. I just didn't like how bright that yellow was. There we go. So, the chair is already much more interesting, in my opinion. Pick up a bit of white because I have to do a highlight. And it's hard to highlight when your paint is wet on wet. So I may have to wait a second or two, but maybe I'll give that a little bit of a highlight at the front. There. Okay, so our chair for now is drying with a light coat of paint on it, and you can see that I already have another shadow. So I am going to put my brush in some water. So I usually generally wash my brushes right at the end, especially if I'm working in mixed media brushes and my acrylic and or my chalk paint brushes, and then I'll wash them at the end because I just have a lot of brushes on the go. But if you need to wash your brush to reuse it, then make sure you dry it as well, because water is very corrosive to paintings. Okay, so now all I'm doing with my hand, because this is dry enough, it still feels cool. So cool means that it's not set at all, but it is dry to the touch. This is when our paintings are very vulnerable to water and things like that. So if you want to make some water drips or something, you can spray it and then let that eat through, and you can remove to some of the text below. But all I did for this was just remove some of the little nubs. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stain in my little grooves. So I'm going to take a brush, and I have a couple options here. So I can use my big vat of goo, which is, if anybody has one of those started, it's just, I'll show you, it's just a bucket where I clean my brushes, and I just have all kinds of colors going in there. It's more like a brown, but it's basically a tinted water. You can also make one of these with coffee grounds or with tea bags, and then add some paint or whatever you want. You just want it to keep getting messier and messier, so it's not one color. The other thing you can stain with is walnut ink, so that's something I use a lot of. But for this, because I want you to be able to work with what you have, we're just going to use a dark acrylic paint. Okay, so what is important to know about this is that we have to move relatively quickly because this is not dry. Had I let this dry overnight, we would have the advantage of things not smearing and becoming muddy. Okay, so things become very muddy very quickly. So I'm going to have a piece of paper towel ready, and for those of you who have baby wipes, you can get a baby wipe or two ready. If you don't have them, don't worry about it. Maybe take 2 paper towels. One you can spray with a bit of water, and then one you can have just dry. So I have those at the ready because what I'm doing is I'm going to dip my brush into some clean water. Okay, so I want my brush to actually have a lot of water in it, and then I'm going to pick up a bit of the black paint, and I'm going to mix it on the side of the palette. What I'm looking for is a very inky, movable black that's not going to stain my surface entirely. What I want it to do is I want it to float over the surface and to get into those little grooves with lots of water. If it's too dry, you're not going to get it looking like a stain, you're going to get it looking like a paint. There we go, which will be hard to remove. So I'm just trying to get those little recessed areas stained. So now I can pick up any excess water and stain using a dry paper towel. Okay, that's that. Now I want to remove the surface. So this is where I'm going to very lightly start to use my baby wipe or my wet paper towel. And I just want to remove the stuff that is sitting on the surface because I want it to stay in the little grooves. So this is showing and revealing your texture. Okay, now for those of you who love a heavily textured area, you could keep, and pay attention to this, you could keep repeating this process. I could add more paint, scratch more, and then do the same thing. Stain, remove. Add more paint, scratch, stain, remove. Keep repeating it until this whole thing looks like, you know what I mean? Like you've built up layers and layers of texture and everything else. And that's how I believe, like I mentioned before, how I believe texture is built. It's by building from the bottom up, and then just keep carving through and building your layers. So I don't believe in, yes, you can use modeling pastes and things like that and create texture, but I think it's very one-dimensional texture. If you want to get like sort of archaeological looking texture, you're going to want to dig down and just keep carving into it and just creating that texture. You can also use different mediums in between, like crackle mediums and things like that, so you get all different types of texture. But I believe texture is built up layer by layer. Okay, so I've spoken enough about that. So you can see, and if you feel your painting, you can feel that it's very wet still. And the reason it's wet is because it's cold. It's still dry to the touch, meaning that I'm not getting paint all over my hands. But I do have a lot of moisture still in it because it's very cold. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to repeat the process of applying some white and some of my other colors that I have beside it. And the reason I'm doing that is because I am trying to build up a surface, but I don't want to cover up everything. So some of those scratches I want to leave. So I'm being kind of strategic here in that I'm going with a very light touch. And I might leave some of the lines as a roadmap. So if you watched me paint before, you'll notice that some of my intersecting lines become, to me, they become the my blueprint for what gets painted and what gets left background. So I have a very loose strategy. It's just put in some lines and see what happens. So I'm following a few of my lines because I find them kind of interesting. I could not have determined the structure for this painting without these random lines. So that's my main reason for doing those lines, is that it helps me find structure within the piece of art itself. So there's one little interesting spot down here that I think I'm going to go less heavy with the paint. But you can see this time I'm not covering as much, and I'm depositing the paint and then moving it around a little bit, and I'm letting that texture now, because we didn't have texture before. Remember, it was very flat. So now I'm allowing some of that texture to be visible because it's sitting on the top surface. Going back in a few areas, add a bit more of the same color that's in that chair. And pick up a bit more white. I'm already out of white. So yeah, I go through a lot of white. Oh, kind of missed my palette. There we go. So very light touch, just brushing over very, very lightly and adding some of that color, as well as traffic calming measures. You know what I'm doing? I'm just trying to calm the whole thing down a little bit because those lines were all a bit distracting, I guess is a good term for it. So there we go. So we have some lines. They're carved out. I think I have a good balance going there, so I don't think I'm going to do any more on that piece. And now we are getting ready to apply our image back on. So I could just plunk this right back in here, but I might start playing a little bit with my composition, because don't forget I have a stencil and I have a mask. So this is called a mask, which is the cutout of a stencil. So, okay, there we go. Okay, so I have this, right? I have that. I have this. And I do have the leg somewhere, but I could just put this behind. That looks good. So I think just for argument's sake, let's go ahead and put this one down. So this is still drying, right? And now this is again wet on wet. So when things are wet, you have to treat them with a bit more, be a little more gentle with them, just because you can move things around. You can make mud very easily. I'm putting the glue over here, but I do know I'm moving some paint around. Glue to glue. Make sure I pull this back so you guys can see it. I just got white paint on the chair. I'll just remove that with the baby wipe. And now I have to push this down, but I have to be more gentle pushing it down, right? I can't just go across with a heavy fist and push this down, because it's all wet, right? So we're still working very delicately. Now, because I cut off that other leg, I think I'm going to strategically place that other chair over top. So I could use my card and just make sure that it's going to dry well. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my image. So let's get out the glue brush, put glue on the back. So what I hope you guys are following along with right now is recognizing that this is happening in layers. We created a very loose background first of collage, added paint, added some texture to it by putting in the scratches. We did a patina in those scratches, which is making those stand out now of the black. Removed the black, added more white to make it a bit more visible. And now we're going in and adding the image. So I'm not being very careful because I got paint on here. So that's why you're seeing a lot of paint on my image, because I got it on the table. But it's still not the end of the world. I'm going to just push this down with the baby wipe and my fingers. Could also use the card. Okay, and I'm going to use that card because magazine images, if you're using a magazine image, you'll notice that they get very wrinkly. So a magazine image over a photocopy, you're going to notice a huge difference in terms of how they behave. Okay, so I've got that one. I just need to look at it for a quick second. And will I do that? I don't know yet. So what I think I'm going to do though is, while this is drying, I'm going to create a bit of a separation here because I do have these lines and this is still very much wet and drying. I think I'm going to create a bit of a separation, and I want to show you how that can be done. So if you have the luxury of things being dry, then you'll sand and or you could tape, sorry. I want to just be able to show you how you can paint beyond a line. So I can go very freeform with this, or I can go very less freeform with this and create a line. So let me do that down here. So painting on the other side of a line is simply taking a bit of paint in your brush, putting something down that's more of a flat edge, and I'm going to pick up some colors that will make a brown. So I'm picking up sort of everything on my palette, all those weird colors that I had, and I'm just going to start mixing them using a lot of yellow, red, and blue till I come up with a color that's a good brown for this piece. So just keep adjusting that color. If you have brown handy, fantastic. You don't need brown, you can use any color. I'm just trying to show you that when I paint on the other side of this, I can then blend it out using my baby wipe, and I can create a nice soft line, okay, without actually having to have a line there or follow that line through. So that's just a little example because I wanted to be able to show you how to do that. And then now I think I'm going to paint in the background because these chairs are standing out to me a little too cute, and I'm not sure I'm going for cute in this. So I'm going to paint out the background. So this is just a decision to make this part a little heavier in the chair. It's not a decision that is based on anything other than a bit of aesthetics. So the whole thing is looking, like I said, to me, it's just a little too pastel, a little too cute. I like things a little grungier, so I'm just going to paint in a background. And I'm going to do the whole chair because I'm realizing that the yellow isn't really working for me. It's okay to change your mind on something. What that means is it's okay to try something and then have it not really suit what you're going for, and then just to go back in and do something different. So like I said, it all contributes to the layers. I'm not sure how that yellow chair in the background will contribute to the layers, other than when it's dry, it may sand back or something like that. So for now, I'm just going to paint this out. And don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to assess all the time. Look at your work and self-assess. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? It's okay also for things when you're doing mixed media to have to go through that ugly duckling phase, because they tend to do that. Nothing wrong with that. There. That feels much better to me. Much better to me. And I think I might scratch back through to some of that yellow. So while it's drying, I might take my scratchy tool and maybe make a few marks around the chair. So this is while it's in the wet paint, right? So very lightly, I'm just making some marks. And because my black paint is in such high contrast to what's happening underneath. We're getting a really strong mark, but I don't mind it. Not minding it at all. And where it's yellow, it's kind of interesting too, because you get a different look. It's not as outlined, if you will. There. So I have to be able to turn this, so I'm going to turn it for a second. And I think this is one thing that I always tend to do, is I tend to do a bit of carving and that sort of thing in wet paint because it's available to me. I always find it really funny that people always want to decipher what my little markings are. And they are so random that it wouldn't make a lot of sense to try and follow the bouncing ball, because there really isn't one. There we go. There. Okay, so while this is having a second to dry, so you guys can see where that's going, right? So while this is having a second to dry, because it does need a bit of dry time, I need to work on what I promised you I was going to show you was integrating text and texture. So at this point, we could infuse a bit of texture. So if anybody has the kit, you'll notice that you've got these little things in there. At this point, what I would do is, so you can incorporate them with glue. I haven't got any anything other than white glue on me right now. But if you have a glue gun handy or a glue stick, you can put it in with any of those things, as long as you put enough glue for the weight of the element. So if you're applying like metal objects or keys or something like that, then obviously this is not a great idea. But you can totally start to add some elements in at this point that have texture. And whether they're pre-painted or not, it doesn't matter. If they have a sticky back, okay, so I get this question all the time. If something comes with a peel and stick back, can I just stick it right on? The answer is no. You will need to apply a glue that can handle all the moisture and time and everything else. So I'm applying just a white glue, and I think I will put it over here. So I could have waited on that, but because I want it to dry, you'll see why I did it in this order. So now I'm going to go in with my background paint, because I need this to be dry. But if you guys have the luxury of time, you don't need to apply this till afterwards. But I want it to blend right in, and I want this to be dry by the time I get to it. So I'm going to leave it like that. And now I'm going to show you how to do your text. So remember I told you before that I thought the easiest way to do lettering is to stamp onto white tissue or onto the back side of a napkin first. And so if you're just tuning in, or you were watching the other day and you didn't get to see this part, when you separate a napkin, it's always 3-ply. The first ply that comes off really easily is great for doing stamping on. So I save these all the time to apply my collage. So I know basically how big I want to make this, and I'm going to stamp something that I want to incorporate in here. So if you guys have those little rubber stamps, I don't have any directly in front of me, but I want to show you that if you have them, the easiest way to, I don't have them in front of me, but they're the little clear ones that are self-clinging. What I do is I get myself a stamp pad, and I actually take the, just put them on the lid, and then spell out your word or spell out one letter at a time, whatever you want. Put them in your stamp pad, and then use that as the backing. That way you're not trying to take those flimsy little stamps and do that on the spot. So I have this old-timey thing that I use a lot, so I'm going to use it and come up with something that I can stamp in here quickly so we can see it. So if you guys are stamping, do that now. Oh, one of my little rubber things broke. So sad. This is an antique. I should be a little more gentle with it. Most of you probably don't have one of these things lying around. So I can make up the words a little more quickly. There are so many places you can buy rubber stamps now. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to do that, and now I'm going to put it in the ink, and I'm going to stamp it directly onto my paper. And I should have maybe thought of something a little more profound before I started this process, but I can tear this out and place them wherever I want, so it doesn't matter if I line it up properly or anything like that. I can just do it on the spot. So this doesn't also have to be text. If you have stamps that you like, objects or animals or whatever, there's so many rubber stamps out there, you can actually just go ahead and do this all the time. Just create lots of layers and collage them in. So there, that's my profound message for this time we find ourselves in now. Take the time. And that can mean so many things to so many people, but for us, you guys are all finding and taking the time for yourselves and your art, which is what this whole thing is about. So I think the armchair, which was just randomly found, doesn't seem so random now, does it? So I'm going to collage this in. So let me show you how to collage this in. This is delicate, delicate, delicate paper, so we don't have the luxury of doing glue to glue because this paper is way too delicate, and that would be really frustrating. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut them out into the size they need to be. So let's say that I had a stamp of a, I don't know, of a butterfly or something, right? So I would stamp that the same way and then do the exact same process. So this might be an ideal time, whoops, this didn't even want to stay. So I can now put this back in, or I was just showing you how to incorporate elements, so that might not actually be the element we want right now. Actually, you know what, I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use a different element. All right, so this element is the same thing but doesn't have the hole in the middle. So the reason I decided to change my mind was because the other one had an awful lot of, this is not a glue brush, the other one had an awful lot of open space, but the open space wasn't the same size as my text. So I'm going to put that here, and then you see this thing has a tab. I'm going to make sure that that tab doesn't glue down because I see an opportunity to hang something off of there. So I'm going to just lift it a little bit and make sure it doesn't get the same glue that everything else gets. Now I need to put some paint on there because it just needs some paint. And I wanted it to be relatively dry. So where my paint is dry over there, I'm going to dry brush a little bit over that So that line isn't as harsh. That was for example, not really because I wanted it to be there, but maybe a little will stay. There we go. Okay, so in this spot, now I'm going to collage in my, my words. So, and the beauty of doing it on this paper is that I can do it like this. So this is not bad. It's not bad, but I think it could be just a wee bit more. And for me, it's all about structure. So when I look at that, I'm like, yeah, it's good, but it's missing a certain something. So I am going to pick up this piece of paper that has another element of collage that is similar in the color veins that I've been working in. So this, you'll see, is going to give me one more layer, as I'm all about the layers. Take that one out. And I'm going to glue that one in. Better that way? Yeah, better that way. So, glue to glue, put that one in. There. So now it's just one more little layer that was so subtle and so easy because it was just there. I'm not hunting, I'm not looking for anything, I'm not looking for the perfect thing, I just found something. And it works because now it breaks up what I'm going for. There we go. So the glue to glue is not necessary, as I mentioned. What I really need to have come across is that I'm just putting the glue where it's going and then I'm pushing it down with my brush. I'm not reloading it with glue if I possibly can. This is kind of stuck in the wet paint. There we go. So I'm pushing that down. Now, if you have a baby wipe, you might want to go in there and dab any excess glue. But now what I'm going to do is, now I'm gonna stain this. I'm going to make this a bit more in the color range that I want. So I know we're over time, so I'm just going to wrap this up in a few seconds for you by getting to stain. So I had, there I go. Okay, I was keeping myself on a timer over here and I sort of lost it. Yeah, I sort of lost it. Oh well, we know we're at that time anyway. So because this is now dry or dry-ish, I'm going to apply some stain overall. And because, so that's my first layer of stain, is that brown that I really wanted to show you. And then, so this just gives it a bit more antique look. And I'm just going to blot some of it off. I just didn't want that chair to look as painted as it was, so I'm using a baby wipe and I'm going in and I'm removing some of the paint. You could also use a bit of sandpaper if your image is a bit drier, if you have gone and painted over it. But you can see how it's incorporating my elements a little bit better. It's making them look a little like not as separate from one another. And now if you don't have the brown, I'm going to show you how you're going to do it with color. So if you have color, you want to do it the same way we did it before with the black. So I'm going to make the color that I want. So I want to use a yellow, and I want the yellow to be just, I don't know, a bit more antique. So I'm going to add a little bit touch of brown. Where was that brown one I was looking for it earlier? Okay, so there we go. Now I'm just going to brush it on a bit thicker, And I'll tell you why I want to do it thicker than than with just the water, because this time I'm not staining. This time I'm actually depositing paint. And that's not, maybe it's an advanced step if you want to call it that, but overall the whole thing was looking a bit too light for me. So now by doing this, I can do a couple things. I can scratch back, but mainly what I want to do is now I just want to use it in some areas as a stain. So I'll use my baby wipe and I'll remove it. And in other areas, I'm going to leave it maybe a bit of full strength. Remember how corrosive baby wipes are? I might have to go back in and add a bit of black. But I want this to take a bit more of an antique look, which is why I'm going in here with the yellow. Now, if you were preparing this for chalk paint, right, the next thing, or for encaustic, your last step before getting to the wax would be to let it dry completely. And I mean completely, whoops, I washed off the word time, so I'm going to have to add that back in. I don't know where it went. But I'm going to, all I have to do is restamp it and add it, so don't worry, it is easy to go back. Yeah, so if you're getting ready for encaustic, all you want to do is, you'll be using different paints, obviously. If you only had acrylic and you still want to use encaustic on something this small, it would be relatively easy for you to do the faux encaustic. So we'll talk about that in 1 second. There. So now that I've removed most of it, I'm going to have to take a clean baby wipe, because you can see all I'm doing is smearing that around. And I'm just going to dab here and there because I want to bring back some of the vibrancy of the white. So it's not a lot, but it's enough that the painting has some contrast. There. Now tell me that doesn't look really antiqued and really old and really like it's been around for a long time. It looks like a discovery more than it does. Now I know what I want to do. So having this, now, maybe what I'll do with spray paint later is I will actually do another chair over top. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So, see, these little things just creep up all the time. So this is not at all dry. I'm showing you, I'm going to go back in and reinforce my black. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be reinforced, because the baby wipe, because it's still so dry, very corrosive. I'm going in right over top of that chair, because I want that chair to come through very slightly, because I'm going to use my stencil. So now I'm glad I had my stencil for this very reason. So 2 things I could do. I could let this dry and I could take sandpaper and I could sand, because don't forget I have the contour of the relief, I should say, of the chair under there, which would bring up kind of like a ghostly outline of the chair. But at this point, what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in with my baby wipe and sort of remove where the chair was. Oh, that's looking much better. So my pink chair no longer has to be my pink chair. Now it's just my distressed background chair. And then now, when that's dry, I'm going to place this over top, or the other way. I haven't really decided. And I'll brush in the white. So let's just say for now we're going to do it like this, because I don't have, I can't spray paint right now. So I'm just going to dispense a bit more white, brush a bit more white on, so you'll be able to get the idea, so that we can talk about encaustic faux finish. So I hope you all are a little further along than I am. Some of you are probably laughing because you're probably still on step 2, but that's okay. You have the advantage of following the video later, asking me questions. I'm just going to bring this chair in with a dry brush of white. And then while it's still a bit wet, I can just sort of shade it and blend the paint a little bit so it doesn't look as brush strokey as it did. There we go. Oh, there, I like that a lot better. So now I can even go in and I can follow some of those contours that I missed. Fun. The other thing that you could still do is, while it's still wet, you could even lift. Like if you wanted to lift and just have your background coming through, you could even do that as well. Maybe I'll just lift a little piece so that you can see what I'm talking about. So that's showing little bits of the chair that was underneath. So do that one as well. Where it's really stuck, you're not going to be able to do it, but like in this case, some of it's coming up really nicely and it's showing the layers underneath. So that's really fun. Okay, so it's actually working really well to remove some of it because it hasn't had a chance to dry. So this to me is the part where I could just get lost in the process of digging and carving and seeing what comes under. So this illustrates my point perfectly about about how you never know what's underneath that might pop through and be consequential to your painting afterwards. And this part that I just ripped off has the colors that's going on up here. So again, to pay a bit of a bit of compliment to the colors, I'm going to collage this one back down in here. And I might even put a bit of black in that one just so it doesn't look as foreign. And let me pick off one more piece because that's just totally fun. Like I said, this is the part I could get lost in this process because I love seeing what's underneath. Some of it is revealing the paper and some of it is revealing the newsprint I had underneath. So there's just like a word here or there that's coming through. Like in this one, you can get right down to the text, which is really fun. I'm going to put this piece up here. Again, because it's got a nice little relationship and it's taking me off the page. And now, so I'll do the time again, but essentially when this is dry, I might add a bit more of that yellow. Actually, while I'm doing it, let's just do it right now. Might add a bit of that yellow back into it so that this white doesn't look as much like it's standing out like a sore thumb. So all I did was add a bit of that white or that yellow back on top, and I'm just going to use my baby wipe and smear a little bit in. So it's kind of just staining the surface as long as you remove it right away. So now tell me that chair doesn't look a million times better than it did when it started. You guys still see? Good. I might have moved this too many times. So I'm going to put the word time back in here after I maybe dry brush a little more of my white back in. And as I'm doing that, I'm noticing that my brush with the white has dried. And so the advantage to that is now I can just go over and add a bit of hits of highlight here and there in some white without adding gobs of white. So this chair is like, oh, I love it now. Okay, so this is also a great place to keep digging. Your paint is still wet, it's still very fragile. And it's time to put marks or anything like that. When this is dry, you won't be able to do that. So we're completely taking advantage of the wet nature of this. Okay, that one, I think I was going to tear because I thought it looked really cool. But actually, you know what? I am going to tear because it does look cool. Okay, so now I'm getting totally ahead of myself. So I've torn off that piece because I like what it's doing in there, but I still do want to add some black back in there so it's not entirely out of place. So I'm just going to dry brush a little of that black back in there, and then I'm going to take my baby wipe and just soften it so that you can see some of those great layers that I just revealed without it being too much. And don't forget, now you've got this little wonder, right, that you can put somewhere else if that was something that you wanted to do. So, and maybe that is something I want to do right there, because that way I can cover up that postage stamp. And I might actually leave a little bit of that red poking through and cover up a little bit of that. Okay, so that is going to be my finished piece. All right, so little fussing, little details now. This is the time to do the little details that make your paintings incredibly you. So if I go back in here, I would take bits of the text. This is buried down way, way, way beneath in layers. So the colors are still relevant. The numbers are still there. I'm going to, where am I going to put that one? I got lots of vertical things, so maybe I'll do a horizontal line. There we go. Just a bit of text. So this is the part that you want to start fussing. So remember when I was telling you, when you're working big and stuff like that, you don't want to be doing detail stuff until we get to the detail part. If you're working in encaustic, this is the ideal time to start thinking about adding your encaustic details after the clear wax goes on, okay? So you don't need to do a lot of this little fussing until later, and that's just a whole different story. But I'm going to add one more fun detail to this because I think it was something I said I was going to cover and I didn't. So tissue papers are the same as your own elements. What you want to do is position your tissue paper where you want it. Put it in and then brush over it, making sure it's really flat. Don't do glue to glue, just do the glue in the one spot. And now very gently you'll want to push it down, blot and remove any excess glue that you just put on top. So I think that little bit of red has enough relationship to the red over here to be complementary without being over the top. And I think we have a stunning little painting here. All pencil, this is when I come in with the all pencil. And what else do I want to tell you? I think that's about it. If you're going to be transitioning to encaustic, different ball game. For those of you who understand, you just want to make sure that there's no shine. So right now it's still wet, so I see shine. But when it's dry, if you have glue and stuff like that, then you have to make sure you go in and you remove. It's easier to remove as you go along with your baby wipe, but ideally what you'd be doing is just picking up some of these sheens with, like I said, as you go, and then afterwards, there we go, and then afterwards when you want to deglaze, you can do it with the wax. So this is how you do full encaustic. I can't do it because it takes a long time to dry. Gloss medium. So this is just by Golden, and I've labeled this one gloss because I keep it in smaller bottles for travel demos, but basically any type of a clear gloss varnish will work. So I even use the Varathane waterborne, like from Home Depot, as long as it's the water one and not the oil-based one. And you're going to want to pour on a very thick layer. And if you brush on a thin layer first, that will set everything, that's fine. But then you're going to want to have a second layer, third layer, fourth layer, whatever. So that's why I just pour on a really thick layer. Let it dry. It has to completely dry, so that's an overnight process. Then when you have it completely dry and the next day you're going to see it's under a thick layer of gloss, that's when you come in with the beeswax polish, the furniture polish. So if you only have, like I said, regular furniture polish, that's fine, but if you want to use the beeswax one, it just works really well and it's not too smelly. And anyway, then you apply it directly over top of the dried varnish, and that makes that thick layer, now instead of looking shiny and glossy, makes it look like a thick layer of wax. So that is it in a nutshell. Like I said, I will answer questions and that sort of thing later. Specific detail, I'm not sure if I'll be able to remember everything, but I'll certainly do my best to get back to you about everything. One thing I did want to, oh, that looks much better there, so I might stamp the word time on that piece. So one thing I did want to talk to you about, though, again, was you have all weekend to post something you made that is inspired by this workshop, okay? So even if it's one little spot that you really love or a failed attempt or anything, just post something and that will qualify you for the big reveals and the prizes and everything else we have going on. I'm going to take this out of the mount now so that we can wrap up and I can show you. Sorry, it's telling me you have to turn my, there I am, hi. So I'm going to turn this around and I can show you a detailed image of what we have going on so far. Let me put it vertical, make it a little easier to see. So that is the piece, right? And now, some of you asked about the moose, so I'm going to stand back and show you the moose. I may have to move him to the floor because he's so big to get a better image. Pardon this shaky camera stuff. I gotta back up. So, that is the moose piece that I finished the other day with the encaustic. And that piece will very soon be available on my website as a print, and along with all the other pieces that that I've made during this open studio. So if you liked any of the pieces, they will be available as prints, both on paper and canvas, very, very soon. Again, I will do the faux encaustic on this one and maybe finish the process. Thank you, Rhonda. And that was that. So, like I said, you've got till Friday or till Sunday night to post something that you did on this class. Just post it in the comments, and if you post in the comments of YouTube, that's fine too. I just don't know if you're going to include pictures there. But anyway, I just really want everybody to see what it is you're doing. One of my big reveals is that I'm going to turn this around so we can chat for one quick sec. One of my big reveals is because of the success of these open studios, I realized that there is going to be a shift happening in the way people take classes and the way people show up for events and things like that. So I have made the decision to not teach in person as much anymore. I still will have workshops and things, but they will be they'll be more special, let's say, like going to Ireland and things like that. But for the most part, give me a few days, maybe even the better part of next week, and my classes are all going to be switched online. So you'll be able to participate in a capacity that will be much more one-on-one, less or more intense workshops. And you can even sign up for the ones that you know are specifically of interest to you, and you can also have a say in what you learn and all that stuff. So that's my big announcement. I am switching to a membership-based online classes, and yes, Ireland's still a go. So, and then of course we'll travel to other places as well, but that makes classroom setting much more special then too. And so that way you can work from the comfort of your own studio, and there'll be so much to offer. So I've been working really in the background on this, and I think it's going to be great for everybody. So moving forward, we have to move forward. Have a great weekend, everyone. I will answer, and I look forward to seeing all your posts of what you tried, attempted, failed at. Doesn't matter what it is. I just want to know that you were here and that that you enjoyed participating. All right, that's it for me. Like I said, the weekend I'm not going to be posting because it's going to be sporadic, so you may see me on and off, and that's because Amanda and I are trying to learn together how to do different platforms and things like that, and split screens and everything else. So unfortunately, the only way to do these things is to go live and to put yourself out there. So that's what we're doing. So we'll be randomly doing that, and bye everybody. Thanks so much. So not till Tuesday, right? So Tuesday noon, again, we'll be doing open studio. So next week, Tuesday through Friday, we'll be doing fixing paintings, abandoning paintings, when to, how to, all that kind of stuff. All right. Bye everybody.